Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's film is 1947's Possessed, directed by Curtis Bernhardt.
David.
Like a brand burned deep into her conscience. One word, one thought dominating her entire existence, leaving its mark on her soul. One word telling 1,000 tales of a woman possessed.
What have I done?
Nothing. Knowing you, it's been wonderful, but Louise, you hang on to me too hard.
I've never had anything in the whole world I ever wanted except you. I just can't go back being on the outside of people's lives, looking in.
He told me other things I hadn't known. About my mother.
What about her?
What about your mother? What did he say?
What's the matter? Don't you believe me?
No.
All right, I lied to him.
It was easy. He believed me, too. What are you going to do about it?
I'm going to tell him the truth about us, and more particularly about you.
I have to confess I was a bit hesitant about watching this movie, much less putting it on the show. Joan Crawford, the star, has always been a bit of an anathema to me. She always seemed a bit off in a way I couldn't exactly put my finger on. She was a great actress, there's no doubt about that, but her personal life was so full of twists and turns and ups and downs and tragedy and triumph that the amount of drama just kind of sucked my will to live. I get the feeling that this particular intro may go on for a while once I get to the bios, but hopefully it'll lend me a better understanding of just who Joan Crawford was. This is an odd thing for me to confess to. I don't usually let personal feelings come into my reviews, and although I'm sure there are legions of viewers who would vehemently argue that fact with me, let me cut that particular argument off by admitting that my views of the movies we broadcast in this show are entirely based on my personal feelings about whatever we're showing. I haven't, until now, let them elbow their way into the bios. While I do sometimes tend to share things about stars and directors that don't exactly show them in the best possible light, I feel that sometimes, anyway, the information I impart shows that they're real people, not the manufactured gods they're turned into by the Hollywood machine. While I understand that if an individual is one of the extremely lucky souls that achieve stardom, often at the price of everything that makes life worth living, success changes everything. You go from being just like everyone else to this adored image of glamour and envy. Your time is eaten by constant demands. You have the leeches that call themselves paparazzi constantly invading your privacy. And everything you do is examined under a microscope wielded by slugs like TMZ. Sometimes you don't realize your dream is actually a nightmare until you achieve what you believed you wanted, only to find out that it wasn't what you wanted after all. Joan Crawford, however, reveled in being a movie star, and when I say movie star, see that in your mind in capital letters. She loved the attention and the glamour and everything that came with it. As I researched her life, I found that she was an amazingly strong woman and held very strong opinions. She was indeed Joan Crawford, not only in her professional but personal life. And if the trials and tribulations she went through as a child negatively affected that, well, that's what happens. I kind of wish I'd known her. I think it would have been an incredible experience. All right, let's get to the movie. Possess concerns a woman in love with a man to the point of insanity. Think stalker times 100 here. And if it proves anything, it proves that stalker behavior is nothing new. A near catatonic woman is found wandering the streets of New York, stopping every man she sees and plaintively asking, "David?" She eventually gets picked up for her bizarre behavior and is put in Bellevue, where a psychologist pledges to help her, but tells her she, Louise, needs to talk and tell him how she came to be in this sorry state. She eventually does, and her story is told in the best noir fashion, in flashback. As it turns out, she was a private nurse to the bedridden wife of a millionaire construction tycoon, and she was in obsessive love with an architect who lived across the lake. The architect, a free-spirited type, finds Louise's suffocating love not to his taste and breaks it off with her before accepting a job in Canada from the tycoon. This destroys Louise, and after the tycoon's wife, who is convinced that the nurse and her husband are having an affair, although they aren't, commits suicide, the tycoon asks her to marry him. She tells him that she doesn't love him, but he says they'll make it work anyway. Louise, feeling she doesn't have much of a choice, marries him. She actually begins enjoying her married life after a while until David comes back into their lives and screws everything up by agreeing to marry Louise's young stepdaughter, despite Louise still being in love with him. As you can guess, this doesn't turn out very well. The bios, or one of them anyway, are going to be pretty long tonight, so let's get to them now. Joan Crawford was born Lucie Faye LeSueur on March 23, 1905 in San Antonio, Texas. She grew up hardscrabble. By the time she was a teenager, she'd had 3 stepfathers and worked a series of menial jobs in her youth, including working in a laundry service with her mother. She was bullied all through her grade and high school career because of her poverty-stricken life, and was sure that her classmates could smell the cleaning chemicals all over her, which led to bacillophobia and an obsession for cleanliness. While still a child, she stepped on a piece of glass while playing barefoot, and it did so much damage to her foot that the doctor told her the odds of walking without a limp for the rest of her life were practically nil. She was determined to be a dancer, so she responded by walking and practicing dance every day for hours for 6 months until she regained her ability to walk without a limp. That very determination was a big help in her becoming a star. She knew what she wanted, and she went after it no matter how much pain it caused her. So I think her role in this movie, not to mention others she took, was really rather fitting. It also made her the tough woman she became later in life. And to me, at least, it shows just how good an actress she was when she played vulnerable roles like in tonight's film. She achieved her dream of becoming a dancer, and it led to her having featured roles in several shows in big Midwest and East Coast cities. After a while, she packed her bags and moved to Hollywood, determined to break into the movies. She appeared in a couple of movies in 1925 before finally landing a credited role in that year's Pretty Ladies as a showgirl. But 3 years later, she appeared in 1928's Our Dancing Daughters and achieved success as a dancer in films, adored as a prototypical flapper. She tired of playing these roles after a few years and finally landed the role that turned her into a star. That is Sadie Thompson in 1932's Rain. She had a great run in MGM, but by the time the 40s rolled around, her star there had faded and the studio stopped offering her roles. After a run-in with studio head Louis B. Mayer, she lost that one. She left MGM and moved to Warner's. Even there, she was considered a has-been until she got the leading role after auditioning for it, which was unheard of for a star of her magnitude even then, in 1945's Mildred Pierce. She won the Oscar for her performance but didn't attend the ceremony since she was convinced she wouldn't win and didn't want to go through the public humiliation. She let the word out that she was ill, but when she heard that she won, she ran to her special makeup room, more about that later, and quickly got ready to face the press in her best nightgown once she got her face on. I suppose that at this juncture I should mention the feud between Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. In 1935, Bette starred in a movie called Dangerous with actor Franchot Tone. During the course of the filming, she fell madly in love with Tone, even though Joan had her eyes on him as well. Bette recalled, "I fell in love with Franchot professionally and privately. Everything about him reflected his elegance from his name to his manners. The recently divorced Joan was on the prowl as well, and according to rumor, Joan invited Tone to her house for lunch and met him at the front door wearing not a stitch of clothing. As you've seen, Joan Crawford was a gorgeous woman, and Tone was pretty much swept up from that moment. They became a huge item in the press and didn't make their affair any secret. In fact, when Tone would break for lunch on a movie, he'd pay Joan a visit and come back with Joan's lipstick smeared all over his face. They announced their marriage, which only lasted for 3 years, and Joan made sure Betty knew about it. Betty had always looked down on Joan as nothing more than a dancer. Betty had learned to act on the stage and felt that Joan was beneath her, additionally saying that, and I quote, "She slept with every male star at MGM except Lassie." Joan was no kinder towards Betty, once saying, "Poor Betty. She looks like she's never had a happy day or night in her life." Making things worse was the fact that once Joan moved to Warner's, she was in direct competition for roles with Betty. Davis had, in fact, turned down the title role in Mildred Pierce, for which Joan won an Oscar. I'm fairly sure this didn't help matters much either. In 1962, the two of them were signed to appear on screen together for the first time in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, a Southern Gothic movie directed by Robert Aldrich. The story was about a faded child star played by Davis and her sister played by Crawford, who was a current star. Betty's character, who looks absolutely grotesque and is dangerously unbalanced to begin with, cripples her sister, and the two end up living together in a huge, otherwise deserted mansion. The movie is pretty much about the battle of wills between the two women, and it's a great film. Both actresses were complete pros during production, never late to the set and always ready to go before the camera, their lines committed to memory. Both of them gave their all, and the movie is gripping, which is surprising as Aldrich was primarily known as being a man's director, and his movies reflect that. He directed such testosterone-fueled movies as 1954's Vera Cruz, 1955's Kiss Me Deadly, 1965's Flight of the Phoenix, and especially 1967's The Dirty Dozen, a personal favorite of mine. Betty herself applied the makeup she wore in this movie. She mentioned later that she'd never have asked a professional makeup man to make her appear so hideous for fear that they'd never work in the business again. She felt that Baby Jane never washed her face, just applied another layer of makeup to it. When Aldrich saw her in full makeup for the first time, he was horrified, but eventually realized that Betty's instincts were right on the money. In fact, when Henry Farrell, the author of the original story, saw her on set, he cried, "My God, you look exactly as I pictured Baby Jane." Conversely, Aldrich had a hard time convincing Joan to unglamorize herself for the film. Joan, being who she was, always insisted on having her hair, makeup, and gowns absolutely perfect, and it took Aldrich no little effort to get her to dress down. At the time, Joan was married to the chairman of the Pepsi Corporation and had in her contract not only a Pepsi machine installed in her dressing room, but insisted on product placement in all the movies she appeared in. Betty had a Coke machine installed in her dressing room and shared the soda with crew members just to piss Joan off. Things got really catty when Betty was nominated for an Oscar for her role and went out of her way not to give Joan any credit or even mention her contribution to the movie. Joan took affront at this and contacted all of the Best Actress nominees, offering to accept for them if they won. Amazingly, they all agreed to this, and when the winner that year was announced, both of them were off stage waiting. That's how they used to do the Oscars, by the way. The nominees waited off stage instead of in the audience. Betty was positive she was going to win, and when the envelope was opened and Anne Bancroft's name was announced, Joan put her hand on Betty's shoulder and said, "Excuse me, I have an Oscar to accept," and brushed past her onto the stage. Well. However bad the feud got, Betty gained a certain amount of respect for Joan, although she rarely mentioned it. She found her to be a true pro who was never late and always knew her lines, although she got the last word in after Joan died, saying, "You should never say bad things about the dead, only good. Joan Crawford is dead. That's good." After her husband's death, Joan's career began to wind down and she took over as the CEO of Pepsi. The execs on the board tried to squeeze her out, but she was having none of that. She was as tough as ever, and when they made a power play, she warned them, "Don't f*** with me, fellows." They backed off. It would seem that the thing Joan is going to be most remembered for is her adopted daughter Christina's memoir, Mommy Dearest. This is unfortunate, in my opinion. While she may have been possessed in real life by the demons of her youth, Joan Crawford was a beautiful, amazingly talented actress that deserves to be remembered in a better way. I mentioned earlier that Joan had a special makeup room. In her early days of acting during the silent era, she became great good friends with a young actor named William Haynes. Haynes specialized in playing playboys with good hearts that are cut down to size by their girlfriends by the end of the movie, and he was incredibly popular during the silent era. But the tabloid press got wind of the fact that he was gay. Although the studio tried to keep it quiet, word got out and his career was over. And when I say that, I mean Louis B. Mayer told him either to dump his partner and marry a girl the studio told him, or he was finished. Haynes, who truly loved his partner, refused. Luckily for him, like most gay men, he had a great sense of style and became a very popular interior decorator. Joan, in fact, was one of the first ones to hire him to design her house. Knowing her as he did, he designed a makeup room that would allow Jo to become Joan Crawford by surrounding her with mirrors and the harshest possible lighting, so any flaw would be visible. But he did it with style. Because I'm forced by time constraints to be rather terse with the bios, I am forced to leave out the many truly wonderful, generous things Joan Crawford did during her life. For instance, she personally answered and signed all of her fan mail herself, typing replies on blue paper and signing it. When she was asked to take over the role Carole Lombard was to play in 1942's They All Kissed the Bride after Lombard was killed in a plane crash, she donated her entire salary for the movie to the Red Cross. When she found out that her agent took his 10% off the top before it was donated, she fired him. In 1934, she contacted the doctor who had performed her dental and facial work in 1928 and asked him if there were a way she could set up a program wherein she could underwrite the medical care of destitute patients who had ever worked in any capacity for the film industry. They would receive whatever care they needed at the Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital, and all the bills would be sent to her. She paid them and never took any public credit for her charity. An internal record at the hospital revealed that she paid for over 390 major surgeries for people she'd never even met. There is a lot I'm leaving out of this bio, and most of it is bad. If you're interested in the bad as well as the good, there are tons of books and internet articles that lovingly recount all of it. Joan Crawford died of a heart attack on May 10th, 1977 in New York City. Van Heflin was born Emmett Evan Heflin on December 13, 1908 in Walters, Oklahoma. After his parents separated, he was sent to live with his grandmother in California, but he was a restless spirit and went to sea on a tramp steamer after graduating high school. After a year or so, he tried his hand at acting and enrolled in the Yale School of Drama. After appearing in a few stage flops, he returned to the sea for 3 years and in 1936 finally got a break with a good role in a well-received play. Katharine Hepburn saw him on stage and arranged for him to appear in 1936's A Woman Rebels. He was at RKO for a while, appearing in mostly forgettable films, later returning to the stage for brief periods. He was then awarded an 8-year contract with MGM, and in 1941 he appeared in Johnny Eager, winning an Oscar as Best Supporting Actor. After this, he began to win leading roles, and in the 50s became a respected character actor, working steadily until his death from a heart attack on July 23, 1971 in Los Angeles, California. There are a few other people I should do bios for here, but I fear I spent so much time talking about Joni that I have run out of time, so let me sum up. Possessed is a good movie, despite its rather soap opera-ish plot. I think this one is worth staying up for, something I don't say often about the movies we show. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Possessed, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.